Welcome, chosen one. The truth does not always knock politely. Sometimes it breaks through the door and exposes everything that was hiding behind it. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey when the universe stops being subtle. It stops sending hints, it stops whispering warnings, and suddenly the truth is placed directly in front of everyone. And when that moment comes, people do not simply react, they unravel. The truth about you was not quietly discovered. It spilled out, it spread, and it reached the very people who tried to bury it, like a spiritual boomerang returning with perfect aim. Here is something psychology has shown us for years. Few things shake a person more than realizing the story they created about someone was completely wrong. It can trigger panic, denial, embarrassment, anger, and sometimes the kind of emotional confusion they do not know how to explain. That is exactly what is happening around you. For months, years, and perhaps even entire seasons of their lives, people confidently believed they had you figured out. They thought they understood who you were. They thought they knew what you were capable of. They acted as if they had somehow been given the authority to narrate your destiny. Their assumptions became facts in their minds. Their opinions became truth. Their judgments became your biography. But then everything changed. The truth flipped the entire script. And now, the people who thought they understood you are struggling to understand what they are seeing. They are not just whispering anymore. They are recalibrating. They are not simply shocked. They are questioning everything they thought they knew. Some are pretending they always knew who you were. Meanwhile, their minds are struggling to process the reality right in front of them. Because the truth about you did more than challenge their beliefs. It humbled their ego. It exposed their motives. And it forced them to confront the version of you they wanted to believe in instead of the person you actually are. And here is the interesting part. The very people who once claimed you were nothing special are now quietly trying to understand how the person they dismissed became someone they cannot replace, ignore, or outshine. They did not expect this plot twist, and they are not handling it very well. Because as the truth continues to spread, naturally, effortlessly, and undeniably, one thing is becoming clear. You did not suddenly become someone else. Their illusion of you simply collapsed. And now they are struggling to understand how they failed to see what was right in front of them the entire time. Number one, they finally realized you were never trying to impress them. You were busy outgrowing their entire environment. For a long time, people around you believed you cared deeply about their approval. They thought you were playing the same game they were playing, trying to fit in, trying to be liked, trying to be accepted, trying to meet the expectations of the people around you. They assumed every quiet moment meant you were waiting for validation. They thought every setback would eventually send you running back to them. And whenever you succeeded, they called it luck instead of recognizing the intention behind it. They built an entire storyline around you. And for a while, they believed it. But only because they never expected you to grow beyond it. Then the truth hit them, and it hit them hard. You were never competing with them. While they were busy comparing themselves to others, gossiping, analyzing, ranking, and watching who was ahead, you were doing something completely different. You were evolving. You were healing. You were learning. You were building. You were observing. And you were quietly transforming your inner world. You were never running their race because you were walking an entirely different path. While they were collecting social points, you were becoming someone their entire environment could no longer contain. And your growth revealed something deeply uncomfortable to them. Their world had become too small for the version of you that emerged. They did not learn this because you stood up and announced it. They learned it through your results. You did not beg for attention. You did not fight for a seat at the table. You simply outgrew the room so completely that the table eventually became irrelevant. That was the moment they understood that you were no longer part of the dynamic they were trying to control. They also began to realize that the limitations they placed on you were never reality. They were projections. What they called insecurity was actually quiet self-development. What they called confusion was actually strategic withdrawal. What they called weakness was actually the strength required to break cycles they themselves are still trapped in. They underestimated your potential, your discipline, your clarity, and your depth. Now they are experiencing a kind of shock they cannot easily hide. It is unsettling to realize that the person you dismissed is the same person who quietly surpassed everything you expected from them. And what makes it even harder for them is that you were never trying to outdo anyone. You were simply removing the things that no longer aligned with your purpose. And almost without effort, you stepped into a level they never believed you could reach. That is why they are struggling now. Because the truth is undeniable. They did not lose the old version of you. They simply failed to keep up with the person you became. Number 2, they discovered you were operating with information they never knew you had. What unsettled people most was not just your growth. It was realizing that you had been moving with a level of understanding they could not explain. For a long time, they assumed you were unaware. They thought they could hide things from you, manipulate situations around you, stay 2 steps ahead. But the truth that has now come to light is simple. You were never behind. You were quiet. You were never confused. You were observing. And while they were busy underestimating you, you were noticing details they did not even realize you had seen. People expected you to operate only from surface-level perception because that is how they see the world. They judge what they can see, what they hear, and what they assume. But you have always noticed more. You recognize hidden meanings. You see patterns. You sense intentions. You notice changes in tone. You observe shifts in behavior. And you recognize when someone's energy does not match their words. You were reading the room when they thought you were distracted. You were recognizing motives when they assumed you were slow. You were discovering truths when they believed you were completely in the dark. And when this realization finally reached them, it shook them. They began to understand that you had been responding to things they never realized you understood. You were not reacting blindly. You were moving from insight. Decisions they thought were random were actually intentional. The distance you created was not emotional. It was strategic. The timing of your decisions was not coincidence. It came from a level of clarity they never knew you possessed. That truth humbled people in ways they are trying hard not to reveal. They now understand that they were not dealing with someone they could easily mislead with half-truths or manipulate with false friendliness. They were dealing with someone who sees beneath the surface, someone who understands people even when those people are trying their best not to be understood, someone who can recognize the truth without waiting for a confession. And now they are uneasy. Not because you publicly exposed them, but because you saw through them privately. The realization that you have always carried an inner intelligence they cannot imitate has completely shifted the dynamic. They can no longer treat you as if you do not know what is happening, because the truth is, you knew much more than they ever realized. Number 3, they discovered you were never the weak one. You were enduring what would have broken them. For a long time, people misunderstood your strength because it was not loud. You did not need dramatic reactions. You did not constantly explain yourself. You did not put your toughness on display. So they assumed you were struggling. They thought you were barely holding everything together. They never realized that your calmness was not denial. It was resilience working quietly. The truth is that the things you walked through were not small, and they were certainly not easy. Before we go any further into the deep mysteries of tomorrow, I need you to pause and physically partner with this move of God. If this message is piercing your soul and confirming what you already feel in your spirit, I strongly urge you to support this channel right now by giving through the link in the video description and pinned comment. Your generosity is not just a donation. It is a prophetic act, a physical seed planted into the spiritual soil of your own breakthrough. When you support God's work, you line up your finances with heaven's eternal plan, breaking the chains of lack and opening up a floodgate of divine provision over your household for generations. Take a moment right now and type this short prophetic phrase in the comments to seal your deliverance. My season of suffering expires today. Let that be the public proof of your permanent transition. You carried burdens that required emotional endurance, mental discipline, and spiritual strength that many people simply do not possess. You carried responsibility, betrayal, heartbreak, disappointment, pressure, and challenges that would have crushed some of the same people who were calling you weak. They had no idea you were surviving storms they could not have stood in for even a moment. People often believe strength has to look aggressive. They think it must be loud, dominant, confrontational. But your strength looked different. Your strength looked like patience. It looked like showing up when you were exhausted. It looked like remaining grounded when everything around you felt unstable. It looked like refusing to become bitter even when you had every reason to. They saw only the surface, so they assumed you were soft. What they did not know was that you were holding up your entire world with strength they never had to develop. Now the truth is becoming clear, and it is affecting them more deeply than they expected. They are realizing that the person they dismissed as fragile was actually fighting internal battles with extraordinary endurance. They are learning that your quiet suffering was never weakness. It was proof of a kind of strength they cannot perform and cannot fake. And suddenly, things are beginning to make sense. How you survived without losing your character. How you kept moving without completely collapsing. How you remained compassionate while being tested again and again. This realization embarrasses them because it exposes how badly they misjudged you. They would have folded under the pressure you survived. They would have abandoned paths you continued walking. They would have broken in situations you learned to endure with grace. And now the truth is clear. You were never the weak one. You were simply the one strong enough to survive battles they never even knew you were fighting. Number 4, they finally realized you never fought back because you refused to lower yourself into their chaos. People were convinced that your silence meant they were winning. They assumed your refusal to retaliate meant they had intimidated you, overpowered you, or backed you into a corner. They talked about how you never responded, how you let things go, how you refused to react. And they convinced themselves that your silence meant you were afraid. But the truth that eventually came through was painfully simple. You were never scared. You were simply operating from a higher level of discipline. Your restraint was not weakness, it was wisdom. It was the understanding that responding to certain behavior only gives that behavior more importance than it deserves. You were never confused about what was happening. You knew, you saw it, and you consciously chose not to participate. You recognized early on that their energy did not deserve your attention. Their intentions were too small, their motives were too corrupted, and their chaos was not something you needed to carry. You understood the long-term consequences of actions they treated like harmless games. You understood the cost of matching negativity with negativity. And you knew that stepping into their chaos could pull you away from the purpose you were growing into. So you walked away. Not because you could not fight, but because fighting them would have cost you more than walking away ever could. And now that the truth is becoming clear, their ego is struggling to handle it. They finally understand that you were not ignoring them because they intimidated you. You were ignoring them because engaging with them would have taken you backward. Your silence was never a lack of power. It was evidence of power they did not recognize. It was the kind of strength that does not need to scream, argue, or prove anything. And what unsettles them most is that they have no strategy for someone who refuses to enter the battlefield they created. Their entire plan depended on pulling you into conflict. They needed your reaction. They needed your anger. They needed you to participate. But you refused. And by refusing to validate the attack, You took away its power. Now they are left trying to fight a battle you never even agreed to enter. And they are finally realizing something they should have understood long ago. You were never beneath them. You were simply above the situation. Number 5, your absence revealed that you were quietly holding more together than anyone realized. People rarely recognize the foundation of a space until that foundation is no longer there. For a long time, you were treated as though you did not matter, as though your presence was ordinary, as though nothing would change without you. But the moment you stepped back, the truth began to reveal itself. The harmony people took for granted started to crack. Conversations that once flowed naturally became awkward. People who appeared friendly began clashing. Small misunderstandings turned into unnecessary drama. And suddenly, the atmosphere no longer felt the same, because the person who had quietly brought peace, direction, and emotional balance was no longer there. They never understood how much you contributed because you never made a performance out of it. You did not need the spotlight. You did not dominate the room. Your presence simply helped regulate the atmosphere. You knew when to lighten the mood, when to redirect tension, when to bring peace without making it obvious. You sensed when someone was struggling, and sometimes, without saying much at all, you adjusted your own energy in a way that helped the entire room settle. Because it came naturally to you, people assumed it was not important. But once you stepped away, they started seeing what had really been happening. The problems they blamed on you did not disappear. In many cases, they multiplied. The tension, the misunderstandings, the drama. The very things they projected onto you became more obvious after you were gone. And suddenly, the truth became impossible to ignore. You were not the problem. You had been helping hold things together. You were not creating chaos. You were quietly preventing it. If this message is helping you, let me say this gently. Messages like this continue reaching people because some choose to support the work. There is a link in the description if you genuinely feel led to sow into it. But never give because you feel pressured. And if all you can give today is a prayer for the next person who needs this message, that matters too. Let's continue. Your absence did not simply leave an empty space. It revealed what everyone else had been refusing to see. And now they are asking why everything feels different, why the group no longer connects the same way, why there is no longer that emotional balance holding everything together. Slowly, they are beginning to understand. The person they overlooked was quietly helping everyone stay aligned. You were the grounding presence they never acknowledged, until your absence became the evidence. The room did not fall apart because you left. It fell apart because they finally realized how much you had been holding together. Number 6, they discovered that people respect you far more than they ever admitted publicly. What shocked your critics was not only your growth or your strength, it was discovering what people had been saying about you when you were not around. For a long time, those who disliked you felt confident that everyone saw you the way they did. They assumed people believed their version of you. Unimportant, unimpressive, irrelevant. They convinced themselves that their opinion represented everyone else's opinion. But eventually, the truth slipped out. People actually respected you far more than they were willing to say openly. You had supporters who never announced themselves, people who quietly admired your character, your resilience, your integrity, and the way you moved through life without stepping on others to get ahead. Some people had been defending your name in rooms you never entered, correcting lies, stopping gossip, shutting down disrespect, and giving you credit when others refused to. That discovery shook the people who tried to minimize you, because it destroyed the confidence they had built around their own narrative. They spent so much time trying to convince others that you did not matter, but the same people they were trying to influence had quietly formed their own opinions about you. And those opinions were not based on gossip. They were based on observation. Some of the people who never publicly praised you were privately speaking up for you when it mattered most. And that is something your critics did not expect. Respect does not always appear as applause. Sometimes it appears when someone corrects a lie while you are not even in the room. And you earned that kind of respect without chasing it. Your consistency earned it. Your character earned it. The way you handled adversity earned it. You built credibility that cannot be manufactured. And that realization hit your critics hard. They thought everyone agreed with them. But many people were simply watching them reveal their own insecurity while quietly respecting you even more. The truth is undeniable now. You were never insignificant. Some people simply did not want to admit how highly they thought of you. Number 7, they discovered that you were never the problem. You were the mirror. For a long time, people convinced themselves that you were the source of their discomfort. They blamed you for tension, for misunderstandings, for emotional reactions they could not explain. They told themselves you were too much, too different, too complicated. Because blaming you was easier than confronting what your presence was revealing inside them. But eventually, the truth became clear. You were never the disturbance. You were the reflection. Your presence did not create their problems. It revealed the problems they had been avoiding. Your growth did not threaten their position. It threatened the excuses they were hiding behind. Your confidence highlighted their insecurity. Your honesty highlighted their avoidance. Your progress made their stagnation harder to ignore. Without even trying, you reminded them of what was possible. And that made them uncomfortable. People do not always get angry at a mirror because the mirror is wrong. Sometimes they get angry because it shows them something they were not ready to see. And that is exactly what happened with you. Every time you grew, they were reminded of the areas in their own lives where they were refusing to do the work. Every time you healed, they were reminded of wounds they continued to avoid. Every time you walked in your truth, they were reminded of how long they had been running from theirs. And once they finally understood this, the old story they created about you stopped making sense. They removed you and expected everything to improve. But their lives did not suddenly become peaceful. Their patterns did not disappear. Their problems remained. The chaos they blamed on you continued. And that proved something they did not want to admit. It was never coming from you. It was coming from within them. That truth hit harder than anything you could have said. You did not have to expose them. Reality did. And now they are being forced to confront the most uncomfortable truth of all. The conflict they kept blaming on someone else was often something they needed to confront within themselves. You did not create their problems. You simply made it harder for them to hide from what was already broken. You were never the villain. You were the mirror they were not ready to look into. Number 8, they realized you gained influence without playing the social games they depended on. Few things frustrated your critics more than watching you rise without participating in the games they believed were necessary. They formed alliances. They created groups. They adjusted their personalities to fit wherever they believed there was an advantage. They worked constantly to control narratives, protect appearances, and gain social influence. And even after all of that effort, their impact often remained limited to the same people they kept trying to impress. Meanwhile, you moved differently. You were not chasing attention. You were not chasing alliances. You did not change who you were just to gain approval. You did not rehearse every word or carefully construct an image to make yourself look important. You simply showed up as yourself. Consistent, grounded, direct. And somehow, that authenticity created the kind of influence their entire strategy could not produce. What bothered them most was how natural your impact was. You did not force it. You did not sell yourself. You did not manipulate situations to gain an advantage. Your influence came from presence, not performance. The way you carried yourself, the way you handled difficult situations, the way you spoke, the way you treated people. All of it created a reputation stronger than anything they could manufacture. People trusted you without being pressured. They respected you without being convinced. They gravitated toward you without needing a campaign. And that completely unsettled the people who believed influence could only be created through politics and strategy. They assumed you would remain invisible because you did not follow their rules. But your authenticity moved faster than their tactics. Your integrity outshined their strategy. And the natural way people responded to you exposed the weakness in everything they were trying to build. They spent years climbing ladders, and eventually, they realized you walked past those ladders without needing them. While they invested their energy in gossip, appearances, and social positioning, you invested in growth, purpose, and becoming more aligned with who you truly are. That is why you eventually reached places they thought only their methods could reach. Your rise challenged everything they believed about influence, because it proved that real influence does not always come from playing the game. Sometimes it comes from becoming someone who no longer needs to. Number 9, they discovered that you are not easily replaced. You are irreplaceable. At first, people assumed losing you would not matter very much. They believed someone else could simply fill the space you left. They treated your absence as a minor inconvenience, a temporary adjustment, nothing more. But when you stepped away, reality hit them harder than they expected. What you brought into their lives was not common, it was not ordinary, and it was not something they could simply find again. You were never a placeholder. You made a difference. They expected everything to continue normally without you. But something changed. Conversations lost depth. Interactions felt forced. Plans no longer flowed the same way. The entire atmosphere shifted. And it was not because you were always doing the most. It was because the qualities you naturally carried were difficult to recreate. You brought clarity. You brought perspective. You helped ground situations. You had a way of improving the atmosphere without even trying. And those are the kinds of qualities people often take for granted until they are gone. The truth they are now facing is simple. You are not repeatable. The combination of your character, emotional strength, intuition, humor, compassion, intelligence, and presence does not come in duplicates. People can copy your style, but they cannot recreate your presence. They can repeat your words, but they cannot reproduce your spirit. They can search for someone similar, but similarity is not the same as substance, and they can feel the difference. What troubles them now is not only regret, it is realization. They thought you would be easy to replace because they never fully understood the value you carried. They took your consistency for granted. They underestimated your impact because you made it look effortless. They treated your loyalty as though it would always be there. But once you stepped away, they finally understood. What you offered was not common. It was rare, intentional, and deeply rooted in who you are. And now they are facing the consequences. The space you filled has still not been filled. Not because they did not try, but because some things cannot simply be replaced. They lost something valuable while believing it was ordinary. You were never just another person in the room, and they learned your value the hard way. Number 10, they finally understood that your silence was never emptiness. It was discernment. Your quietness was never a void. There was always something happening beneath the surface. While people interpreted your silence as weakness, you were observing, recognizing patterns, evaluating motives, understanding the emotional landscape around you. You were not silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because you were paying attention. What they mistook for passivity was actually precision. What they called confusion was often you allowing people to reveal themselves without interruption. Because sometimes the clearest way to understand someone is simply to let them continue talking. You watched, you learned, you remembered, and you allowed the truth to reveal itself. When people finally understood that you were not quiet because you lacked understanding, but because you understood more than they realized, everything changed. The entire dynamic shifted. Your stillness was not emptiness, it was awareness. Your calmness was not weakness, it was control. And that realization created a new question in their minds. If you noticed all of that without saying anything, what else did you see? Your silence allowed you to observe. Your calmness helped guide you. And your restraint often gave people enough space to reveal the truth themselves. That is when they began to understand. You were never behind. You were often ahead. You were never unaware. You were deeply aware. You were never intimidated. You were simply gathering the final pieces needed to confirm what your spirit had already recognized. Their confidence did not collapse because you suddenly became louder. It collapsed because they realized you had never been in the dark. They were. Number 11, they discovered that their lies did not destroy you. They destroyed their own credibility. What they believed would break you eventually became the thing that exposed them. They did not simply miscalculate. They slowly undermined their own credibility. Every lie they told had an expiration date. And when the truth finally surfaced, people began noticing how much energy they had invested in trying to damage your name. Questions started to arise. Why are they always talking about this person? Why does the story keep changing? Why does everything sound so rehearsed? The people trying to tear you down failed to understand something important. The more often someone repeats a lie, the harder it becomes to carry. Eventually, the weight of their own story began to expose them. Their reputation did not collapse in a single moment. It slowly weakened as their inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, you kept growing. You kept moving forward. You kept producing results that contradicted everything being said about you. Your life became evidence. Your actions became proof. And when evidence enters the room, false narratives begin to lose their power. Eventually, people stopped asking whether the stories about you were true. Instead, they began asking a different question. Why are these people so obsessed with you? And that shift changed everything. Because suddenly, the attention turned toward them, their motives, their insecurity, their envy, their fixation. They became trapped inside the very story they tried to create for you, not because you publicly exposed them, but because the truth revealed itself through their desperation. Your integrity survived, their credibility did not. And perhaps the hardest part for them is this: they now have to live with the consequences of the narrative they created while you continue moving forward in the truth they tried to bury. Number 12. They discovered that you were never alone. You were supported in ways they could not understand. When this realization surfaced, it shook them more deeply than they expected. For years, they assumed your survival was luck. They treated your progress as coincidence. They explained your resilience as chance. They convinced themselves you were simply getting by. But eventually, someone began connecting the dots, and the pattern became difficult to ignore. Every attempt to stop you kept failing. Every time someone tried to block you, something changed. Every time they expected you to fall, you found a way forward. And suddenly, the question became impossible to avoid. What is protecting this person? That realization changed the entire narrative. Your breakthroughs no longer looked random. Your progress no longer looked accidental. The more people tried to undermine you, the clearer it became that there was something around your life they could not easily interfere with. Plans fell apart. Hidden intentions were exposed. People changed their minds. Opportunities appeared where there seemed to be none. And situations that were meant to stop you somehow ended up clearing your path. People can deny many things, but patterns are difficult to ignore. And the pattern around your life became undeniable. The things meant to harm you did not always have the effect people expected. The traps they set did not always work. The betrayals that were supposed to stop you often pushed you toward a new direction. And eventually, arrogance began giving way to fear, because they realized they were not simply dealing with someone they could easily manipulate or control. There was something about your resilience they could not explain, and the part that unsettled them most was your calmness. Your patience began to make sense. Your silence began to make sense. You were not always afraid. You were aligned. You were moving with a strength they could not control or manipulate. When they finally understood that you were not walking alone, everything changed. Not because the situation suddenly shifted in your favor, but because they finally became aware that it had never been as easy to control you as they believed. And now they understand the truth. They never fully understood what they were dealing with. Number 13, they discovered that you did not need closure because you already had clarity. This realization affected them more than any confrontation could have. They expected you to return, to ask questions, to demand explanations, to search for answers that would make them feel important. They thought you would come back looking for closure, but you never did. You walked away. And your ability to keep moving forward made them realize that you were no longer waiting for anything from them. Not their honesty, not their confession, not their apology. Because you had already understood enough. What they failed to recognize was that your clarity did not come from their words. It came from observation, from discernment, from recognizing patterns. You connected details they believed were hidden. You noticed behavior they assumed you would ignore. You understood their actions long before they realized you had been paying attention. And by the time they finally revealed who they truly were, you had already outgrown the entire situation. That is why you did not argue. That is why you did not send long explanations. That is why you did not chase answers. Closure was never missing. It arrived the moment you accepted the truth of who they were. And that is what unsettles them now. Your silence was not fear. It was not confusion. It was not emotional emptiness. It was the peace of someone who had already processed what happened and accepted reality. You were not clinging to the past. You were walking toward what was next. Meanwhile, they remained connected to a moment you had already released. They expected you to need them to finish the story. But you wrote your own ending without them, and that is the part they struggle to understand. You did not need their version of the truth because you had already seen enough. You did not need their closure because you had already closed the chapter within yourself. You moved forward, while they remained stuck replaying what happened. Now they are revisiting conversations, replaying moments, and wondering whether they should have treated you differently. But they were not prepared for the strength of someone who does not return searching for clarity. They were not prepared for someone who does not need permission to heal. And now they have to accept a simple truth. You did not walk away confused. You walked away finished. Number 14, they are now facing their greatest fear. People are beginning to see you for who you truly are. This was the moment they never prepared for. The moment the false version of you finally collapsed under the weight of reality. For a long time, they relied on whispers, distortions, exaggerated stories, anything that could influence how other people saw you. They believed their version of you would remain in people's minds forever. They assumed their influence was strong enough to shape your reputation permanently. But truth has a way of resurfacing, and when it finally does, there is often nothing anyone can do to stop it. The image they created of you did not simply disappear quietly. It began falling apart. The cracks became visible. The contradictions became obvious. And the people they had tried to influence began looking more closely. The biggest shock was not simply that people stopped believing them. It was how quickly people began recognizing the real you. Your depth, your sincerity, your intelligence, your grace, your consistency. The goodness they tried to hide became even more visible once the false narrative began to fall apart. And that is what they feared most. Not simply your success, but the truth about who you are becoming impossible to deny. People began connecting the dots. They started comparing their own experiences with you to the stories they had been told. And slowly, they noticed something important. Your character did not match the rumors. Your actions did not match the accusations. And one realization after another created a major shift in how people saw you. Nothing frustrates someone more than realizing they have lost control of a story they believed would define another person forever. But now the attention is moving toward your authenticity instead of their accusations, your purpose instead of their projections. And the truth is, you did not force this shift. Your character created it. Your growth created it. Your consistency created it. The truth created it. Truth did what it has always done. It outlived the rumor. And now people can see the contrast. Your light exposed what they tried to hide. Your honesty revealed their manipulation. Your progress exposed their insecurity. And increasingly, people are beginning to see everyone for who they truly are. When truth finally rises to the surface, it does not always arrive quietly. Sometimes it changes everything. And that is what is happening in your story. Hidden intentions, disguised motives, whispers that once surrounded your name. All of it is being exposed by something much larger than the stories people tried to create. What began as small revelations has become a complete unveiling. You were never who they said you were. You were never as small as they insisted. You were never as lost, confused, or powerless as they hoped you would be. The truth did not simply correct a misunderstanding. It changed the way people see you. Piece by piece, the real story has been revealing itself. You were not weak. You were restrained. You were not alone. You were supported in ways they did not understand. You did not need closure. You already had clarity. You were never the problem. You became the mirror that revealed what others needed to confront. You did not lose your value. Your absence proved how much value you carried. You did not fall behind. You simply outgrew the game they were playing. You were not chasing validation. There were people quietly respecting you all along. And their attacks did not destroy you. Their own credibility began to collapse under the weight of what they created. What is happening now is not chaos. It is correction. It is the alignment of truth with perception. It is the moment people begin to recognize your authenticity, your integrity, your strength, your growth, and everything they once failed to understand about you. That is why some people are struggling to accept what they see. The truth did not simply clear your name, it repositioned you, it elevated you. And in many ways, it confirmed what you already knew about yourself long before anyone else was willing to see it. You are entering a new chapter, a chapter where your name begins to carry weight for the right reasons, where your presence is understood instead of constantly misunderstood, where your character speaks louder than the stories others tried to tell about you. This is more than vindication. This is recognition. And it may only be the beginning of what is still unfolding in your life. If this message resonated with you, if it spoke to your spirit and reminded you of your worth, your strength, and your purpose, then subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment, and share this message with someone who may need to hear it right now. Your support helps this message reach others who may be walking through a similar journey. And together, we continue to rise. God bless you.